At 83, Paul McCartney is finally breaking his silence about Ricky Nelson, and what he reveals will leave you stunned. Born James Paul McCartney on June 18, 1942, in the heart of Liverpool, England, Paul's journey began in the shadow of a world recovering from war. Raised in a humble home, his childhood was steeped in both struggle and melody. His father, Jim McCartney, a gifted jazz musician and pianist, filled their modest house with music, while his mother, Mary, a dedicated midwife, instilled in him resilience and compassion. From these humble beginnings emerged a boy whose talent would one day transform the sound of modern music, and whose life would eventually cross paths with one of America's most beloved stars. Music was an integral part of his childhood, exposing him to a diverse array of musical styles ranging from classical and traditional pop to the early days of rock and roll. The tragic loss of his mother to cancer when he was only 14 had a profound impact on him, shaping the emotional depth and sensitivity found in his songwriting. At 15, McCartney encountered a young John Lennon at a church fair, and they quickly connected over their shared passion for American rock and roll and rhythm and blues. This friendship paved the way for the Quarrymen, which eventually transformed into the Beatles by the early 1960s. Alongside Lennon, McCartney established one of the most successful and influential songwriting duos in history. Together with George Harrison and Ringo Starr, the Beatles changed the landscape of music, fashion, art, and social awareness throughout the 1960s. As the Beatles' bassist and co-lead vocalist, Paul McCartney demonstrated unmatched musical versatility. His melodic bass lines, innovative song structures, and vocal range were instrumental in defining the Beatles' sound. Tracks like Yesterday, Hey Jude, Let It Be, Blackbird, and The Long and Winding Road are hailed as masterpieces of contemporary songwriting, many of which were either entirely or predominantly penned by McCartney. Yesterday alone has been covered over 2,000 times, making it one of the most frequently covered songs in history. The Beatles' tenure from 1960 to 1970 was relatively brief, yet the band's influence was monumental. During this period, Paul was more than just a performer, he was a visionary. His contributions included experimentation with orchestral arrangements, tape loops, and psychedelic sounds, particularly evident in albums like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and Revolver. Paul's extensive musical range, from heartfelt ballads to rock anthems, highlighted his versatility and solidified his status as one of the greatest musical geniuses of the 20th century. Paul started a very prosperous solo career after the Beatles broke up in 1970. Together with his wife Linda McCartney and other musicians, he founded Wings, which went on to have a number of singles in the 1970s, including Jet, Silly Love Songs, Band on the Run, and Live and Let Die. His career after the Beatles showed his dedication to artistic development and ongoing inventiveness. His relevance across generations has been further cemented by his collaborations with a diverse spectrum of artists over the decades, including Michael Jackson, Rihanna, Kanye West, and Stevie Wonder. Paul's continuous development as an artist is reflected in his more than 50-year solo career. From his acoustic and reflective albums to his genre-bending compositions like Flaming Pie and Egypt Station, McCartney has never let himself become stuck. He has worked with a variety of musicians, including as Rihanna, Michael Jackson, Kanye West, and Stevie Wonder, spanning generations and musical genres but always adhering to his creative vision. To further showcase his enormous creative breadth, he has also written film scores, electronic music, and classical music. Paul McCartney had a very difficult decade in the 1980s, both personally and professionally. McCartney faced many difficulties during this time, one of which was an increasing drug addiction. He became addicted to drugs as a result of his increasing experimentation and substance usage, which unavoidably had an impact on many facets of his life and profession. His arrest for marijuana possession was a noteworthy event that marked the end of this challenging period. Unwanted public attention and scrutiny were brought about by the arrest and subsequent fine. In addition to legal issues, the 1980s were marred by a catastrophic emotional setback. John Lennon, McCartney's close friend and former bandmate, was tragically murdered. In addition to rocking the music industry, Lennon's assassination in 1980 caused McCartney great personal unease. It was challenging to fill the vacuum left by the passing of Lennon, with whom he had spent some of the most pivotal and life-changing years of his career as a member of the Beatles. Despite his best efforts to continue making music, McCartney was unable to duplicate the degree of creative and financial success that had defined his previous career during this tumultuous decade. The momentum he once had seemed to wane under the weight of his personal struggles and the shifting musical landscape, and his albums and songs from this era frequently failed to garner broad praise or strike a deep chord with the public. But the 1990s were a pivotal decade for McCartney as he started to rediscover his creative energy and pursue new musical directions. During this time, a particularly significant partnership was with Martin Glover, well known by his stage name Youth. The prominent post-punk and industrial rock band Killing Joke was founded by young people. And his creative approach to sound experimentation and music production gave McCartney's work a new lease on life. The Firemen, a project McCartney and Youth co-founded, gave Paul the opportunity to explore ambient, electronic, and experimental music, genres far different from his conventional rock and pop beginnings. Strawberries Oceans, Ships as Forest, their 1993 debut album, demonstrated this new direction with its layered soundscapes and more avant-garde style. In addition to reviving McCartney's creative sensibility, this partnership showed his adaptability and inventiveness. Off the Ground, a more traditional rock album that McCartney also released that year, demonstrated his continued skill as a songwriter and performer. McCartney's steady return to form and importance in the music industry was marked by the album's moderate popularity and tour support. Paul McCartney continued to actively tour, play, and produce new music long into his 60s and beyond as he entered the new century, defying both age and expectations. His art from this time period demonstrated both artistic development and maturity. Excor Meum, 2006, a classical oratorio that demonstrated his compositional abilities outside of the pop-rock genre, was one of his notable albums. His spiritual and philosophical views served as the inspiration for this intensely personal endeavor, which was praised by critics for its richness of composition and emotional depth. After this, he published the album Memory Almost Full in 2007, which combined pop, rock, and reflective lyricism. The album, which garnered positive reviews and confirmed McCartney's continued relevance in modern music, was viewed by many as a return to his classic melodic talents. He returned to work with Youth and the Firemen in 2008, releasing Electric Arguments, an album that furthered their experimentation with electronic and experimental sounds. In addition to his prolific production, this stage of his career demonstrates McCartney's persistent love for music and his never-ending quest to push the boundaries of creativity, demonstrating that his talent remained unaltered despite decades in the business. The influence of McCartney goes well beyond just music. He has tirelessly fought for environmental causes, vegetarianism, animal rights, and other humanitarian causes. In 1997, Queen Elizabeth II knighted him Sir Paul McCartney in recognition of his achievements to music and culture. In addition, he has received numerous accolades, including as 18 Grammys, 2 inductions into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, one as a solo artist and one as a member of the Beatles, and a Kennedy Center Award. Paul McCartney is still touring, releasing new music, and inspiring millions of people worldwide, even in his 80s. His 80-year-old Glastonbury performance in 2022 was praised as a triumph of joy, perseverance, and artistry. He is not only a musical legend but also an eternal representation of artistic tenacity and the human spirit because of his creative vitality, curiosity, and optimism. The public has long been interested in Paul McCartney's personal life, especially his sexual relationships, being one of the most well-known and respected musicians in the world. During the 1960s, when Beatlemania was at its height, Paul was regarded as one of the world's most eligible bachelors. In his early years of fame, he was romantically involved with a number of women and garnered the attention of innumerable admirers due to his handsome appearance, charisma, and extraordinary talent. These connections were a reflection of a young man seeking stability in the midst of the upheaval of international success, even if they were frequently the focus of tabloid rumors. When Paul met Linda Eastman, an American photographer from a well-known family, in 1967, his life took a significant turn. In addition to her job behind the camera, Linda was well known for her independence, grounded nature, and passion for animals. Their bond was strong and immediate. Linda was unimpressed by his celebrity, in contrast to many others in his social circle. It was Paul, not the insect, that she saw. To the astonishment of many admirers who had anticipated a more lavish event, they were married on March 12, 1969, in a small civil ceremony in London. Despite the public's initial skepticism, Paul's choice to wed Linda was sincere, and their union would go on to become one of the most enduring and authentic love stories in the music industry. Paul treated Linda's daughter Heather from her former relationship as his own from the moment they were married, adopting her. Mary, Stella, and James were the three additional children that Paul and Linda had together. They were known for having a close-knit family. Paul stayed loyal to his wife and kids in spite of his wealth and renown, frequently bringing them on tours and finding time for basic family activities. Despite her early lack of musical expertise, Linda herself became quite involved in Paul's music career, even joining his post-Beatles band Wings as a vocalist and pianist. Their collaboration in life and art was demonstrated by her appearance on stage and in his creative life. After a valiant fight with breast cancer, Linda McCartney tragically died in 1998, over 30 years after they were married. Paul, who frequently referred to her as his love and biggest support, was devastated by her passing. He suffered a great deal, withdrawing from society for a while before opening out about the profound loss he experienced. Through her photography, her advocacy for animal rights and vegetarianism, and the lives of her children, whom Paul continued to raise with love and care, Linda's legacy endured. Paul eventually started looking for company once more. He wed Heather Mills, a former model and anti-land activist, in 2002. Their brief romance attracted international media attention. In 2003, the couple welcomed Beatrice, a daughter. But the friendship quickly deteriorated. Their initially hopeful marriage was marred by intense personal conflicts and public scrutiny. They split up by 2006, leading to a highly publicized and acrimonious divorce that was finally finalized in 2008. Both sides found the media sensational processes challenging, and Paul's reputation at the time was clearly damaged. Paul remained Beatrice's loving father in spite of the animosity and made a concerted effort to keep her out of the public eye. Paul was rediscovered by love in a more subdued and mature form. He wed Nancy Shev, a New York businesswoman with experience in the transportation sector, in 2011. Before they became romantically involved, Nancy, who was from a well-known and esteemed family, had known Paul for a while. Compared to his other unions, their wedding was much more subdued. Warm, tasteful, and uncomplicated. After years of emotional turmoil, Nancy provided Paul with a sense of stability and camaraderie, as observed by friends and family. Paul and Nancy have had a steady and comparatively discreet relationship since being married. They are frequently spotted together at gatherings and lending support to one another's pursuits. In interviews, Paul has praised Nancy, saying she helped him feel happy and at ease in his later years. Paul McCartney's romantic journey has paralleled his musical journey over the years, encompassing passion, heartache, perseverance, and, in the end, enduring commitment. His interactions with Linda, Heather, and Nancy reveal a guy who has always yearned for deep, lasting personal connection despite his international renown and remarkable achievements. The 83-year-old Beatle Paul McCartney has finally shared his long-held opinions and thoughts on fellow music legend Ricky Nelson in an open and sincere manner, providing fresh insight into their careers as well as the changing popular music scene of the 20th century. In a recent interview, McCartney, who has typically been quiet about his personal relationships with musicians outside of the Beatles circle, broke decades of silence by expressing his profound admiration for Ricky Nelson, not only as a fan but also as a fellow musician who had a significant impact on his own musical development. As a young teenager growing up in Liverpool in the 1950s, I would tune in eagerly to American radio stations, soaking in the smooth, effortless voice of Ricky Nelson, a sound that struck me as both romantically cool and emotionally vulnerable, McCartney said with the clarity and perspective that only time and age can bring. Paul observed that Nelson's more subdued, reflective style had a certain allure, whereas many of his British peers were obsessed with the more explosive rockabilly sounds of Jerry Lee Lewis or Elvis Presley. He highlighted how Nelson's fusion of rock and roll with emotional sensitivity helped to create a new kind of male pop vocalist who could affect audiences with sincerity, melody, and soul instead of shouting to be heard. McCartney additionally confessed that Nelson's 1958 hit Lonesome Metropolis had such an emotional resonance with him that it would every so often convey him to tears, even in his teenagers. An unprecedented admission from a man no longer prone to sentimentality in public. He stated that the haunting loneliness in Nelson's shipping taught him that a pop song might be greater than a catchy music. It is able to be a genuine window into the human enjoy. As McCartney regarded back on his very own explosive upward thrust to repute with the Beatles within the early 1960s, he admitted that Ricky Nelson's profession served both as a blueprint and a cautionary tale. At the same time as Nelson had enjoyed big reputation as a youngster idol on the adventures of AZ and Harriet, McCartney located that Ricky regularly seemed trapped with the aid of the industrial system that surrounded him, stifling his choice to develop creatively. Paul defined that witnessing Nelson's struggles with creative control made him even more determined to fight for the Beatles' musical independence, especially at some point of their pivotal transition from adorable mop tops to experimental studio artists. He expressed deep empathy for the pressures Nelson ought to have confronted, continuously scuffling with the image others had created for him, whilst he attempted to conform past it. In his reflections, McCartney did no longer pull away from acknowledging the tragedy of Nelson's early dying in 1985 on the age of 45, calling it a first-rate loss now not just to rock and roll, but to American way of life as an entire. He defined it as both heartbreaking and frustrating that Nelson never obtained the overall recognition he deserved as an extreme musician and innovator. McCartney also found out that he had as soon as considered accomplishing out to Nelson in the early 80s for a probable collaboration, however never accompanied through, a remorse he nevertheless consists of. "I always notion we had a certain musical kinship," he stated wistfully. "But time has a way of slipping through your palms." Via choosing to talk so overtly and lovingly approximately Ricky Nelson, now Paul McCartney not most effective venerated the memory of a man he deeply reputable, however also reminded the arena of the often not noted hyperlinks that bind the terrific artists of various generations collectively. It was a shifting tribute from one music legend to every other, and late, deeply human acknowledgement from McCartney that backstage of fame and the burden of records, what mattered maximum changed into the tune they made and the lives they touched with it.